Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, good to be back with you again. I thought today we'd talk a little bit about Billy Martin because why not? Let's go talk about Billy Martin as a manager. Martin, as you know, is very famous in baseball history and is particularly notorious not only for being able to take teams that weren't so great and turning them into champions or championship contenders, but also for taking young arms and ruining them. And that's the thing that I'm really interested in. As you can imagine, there was a discussion that we had online back before the rules for Twitter changed and discussion was destroyed about Billy Martin and about what he did. Well, look here first at his time with Oakland, because this is sort of the famous time. This is the stuff that you think about right away, right? So in 1980, we're looking here at the team screen. What we really want to do is look over here at the American League. We can see that the Oakland Athletics had 94 complete games, which was actually more than double the amount that the Milwaukee Brewers had. And this is kind of where that criticism comes from, right? There's a lot of talk about, oh, well, Martin, didn't have to do that. Somebody was telling me online the other day, he didn't have such a bad bullpen. Look, he had Bob Lacey and Jeff Jones. Lacey, of course, in 1979 had a 5.85 ERA, 70 ERA plus, if you like to look at that. I mean, we go look at his player value. You can see he had a minus 0.6 WAR that year, if that's what you decide to go by. This is a guy who probably, based on how he did in 1979, probably should not have still been at the major league level. And Hugh stayed up there, I think, mostly because Oakland needed some warm bodies. I would say that, if anything, the fact that he played so well in 1980 probably shows that Billy Martin had a positive influence on him, especially since he then proceeded to go over to Cleveland and then Texas in 1981 and was just simply awful and, had a couple of very, very short seasons in the major leagues afterwards and then was basically done after 84, right? So there you have it for Bob Lacey. The other one who was brought up was Jeff Jones. Jeff Jones, of course, was in the minor leagues in 1979. In fact, at AAA, and it's a shame Baseball Reference doesn't tell you who he was with. I guess he was with the Ogden A's, so he was over there in Utah, not too far away from where I grew up. Why did this go off? Whatever. We look at him again. I mean, I know that it was more of a rarefied environment, but, the 3.50 ERA probably wasn't making people think that this guy was going to come to the big leagues right away and do something big, right? In fact, he was actually very much a starting pitcher, not a relief pitcher in his time there. So, I mean, take it for what it's worth, right? But we can argue about like minor league equivalencies and what we should have known and what we shouldn't have known and stuff like that. But overall, I look at this guy and I think, I can kind of see why with this bullpen, and especially if you look at the 1979 A's and what Martin was dealing with, I think you can see why he was thinking, I want to put in my good pitchers and then forget about the rest of these guys because this is a whole bunch of junk, right? So there you have it. That's the reason why you see that with the 1980 A's. 1981, which is the season that most people don't talk about, the A's, again, if I remember correctly, led the league in complete games. A little bit less than twice the number that the Indians had, but remember 81 was that kind of bizarre season, 60 complete games, and the A's made the postseason, helped in large part by the two-half nature of the season. I guess they would have won overall, but whatever, 81 is complicated. And then 1982 is when the A's fell apart and everything fell to pieces. Now, 82 is the season, if you really want to know, when the arms of Langford and Keogh and Norris, McCaddy, and Kingman all started to fall apart. Right? If you're going to talk about complete games destroy player arms, the first place you really have to start with is why did it take them until 1982 to fall apart? And was there anything else that could explain this? Oh, and look at this. The Athletics were second in the league in complete games to the Tigers. That's also interesting. Most people won't bring that up either. So, something to keep in mind. Now, what I was interested in looking at is knowing whether or not there was a pattern here. Unfortunately, when we look right here, there's not too much that we can see, right? Because there's a little bit of information in terms of stealing second, stealing third, sacrifice bunts, intentional walks, and substitutions, sort of, right? But what we're really interested in is just complete games. What was he deciding, right? So let's look here at his later career. I'm going to ignore these seasons where Martin was the manager for half the year, or even 85, he was manager for almost the full year. We're going to ignore it anyway because I don't want to dig too deep into that. In 83 with the Yankees, instead of looking at the individual players, let's just go look at the league here. We'll do it simple. If we go look and see how they did, yeah, look at that. The Yankees did lead the league in complete games, but just barely, 47. Next was Texas and Toronto, both with 43, and Detroit with 42. I mean, it's really neither here nor there. You can say that it's a high amount. It's definitely higher than the league average, but there are a bunch of teams up there with him. That's not like the 1980 A's, Let's go take a look at some of these other seasons, right? We'll start back up from the top. Like I said, we won't look at any of these that are partial seasons just because I don't want to go through the trouble of parsing this all out. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons to look at. Start with 69 with the Twins. So this was Martin's, big league managerial debut. And look at that. The Twins had how many complete games? 41, just barely above the league average. Nowhere close to what the Tigers and Yankees and Orioles had in 1969. Now, I know that this is also nowhere close to what we just saw from the 1980 A's, which is something that's important to note. When we're talking about Martin was an awful manager overusing his pitchers, why are we not seeing that in other seasons, right? 1971 Tigers, sorry, we're looking at the wrong screen. Go back over here to the AL East and take a quick look. And look at that. The Orioles had 71 complete games in 1971. Tigers ended up with 53. That's still above the league average, but is nowhere close to the leaders in the league, right? Seems that Martin, wasn't quite, hanging out with the trends there. 1972, let's do the same thing. So we'll go over here and we'll look at this. This is when the Tigers made the postseason with that famous pennant race they had against Boston, I believe. And I hit the wrong thing, of course. Here we go. Go back up here to the AL East and look at complete games again. Look at that. The Tigers had 46 complete games. The league average was 42. The Orioles, again, led the league with 62, right? So why are we not talking about how awful Earl Weaver was and how his strategies destroyed these pitchers? In fact, a lot of these pitchers who pitched these complete games were still around in 1980, right? It's not a huge difference. I don't know. Let's go look at 1974. Let's see how he did here with Texas. Right, see if we can see any sort of trend here. Now, this time we do see a slight uptick in complete games, but again, it's not the lead in the league, right? The Red Sox and the Angels both had more. Interesting stuff, right? And it's also not a huge distance away from the league average. You see a lot of teams sort of bunched in together. Then, of course, there was this time with the Yankees, so we'll look quickly here in 1976 and see what we come up with. And so we go up here to the AL, to the American League numbers. And yeah, the Yankees had 62, so they're among the leaders in the league with complete games, but they're not standing out as something unusual. The Angels and Rangers both had more, right? It's definitely more than the league average of 49, but I would submit to you that that average is torn down by the fact that the Twins and the Indians had so few complete games. I was about to say they were awful. Not quite. They were both above 500, so not horrible teams, but, that does skew your average just a little bit. And then 1977, we'll close this up here. The Yankees, we see again with 52 complete games, again behind the Orioles. I mean, that's sort of what the point is here, right? If we're going to criticize Billy Martin for something, the statistics here tell me that there was something different going on with the 1980 Oakland Athletics. I mean, it's just pretty obvious. You can go back, you can look at it yourself. I'm not seeing how this guy was, just so awful and was completely misusing every single pitcher arm that he came across. The person I was talking to was telling me, oh, well, there was so-and-so and such who was a promising youngster whose, arm didn't survive. You have a lot of that in the history of baseball. I mean, that's no reason for us to believe that Billy Martin was unusual for what he did, right? I would actually argue that he probably should be celebrated for what he did with the Athletics in 1980. I mean, you think that it's bad now with the Oakland Athletics moving and with them, cycling through players like it's going out of style. It's like one of those, circus acts with the clowns and everybody's getting out of the car and you wonder how many more they have in there. That's what the Athletics roster looks like this year for a team that is just absolutely awful, almost certainly one of the worst teams in baseball history. Well, as bad as that looks, the Athletics were every bit as bad in 1979. I mean, that was a horrible, horrible, horrible team. And Billy Martin came around in 1980, not only turned them into a good team, but turned them into pennant contenders. Somebody was saying, oh, well, they only won 83 games, and they weren't in, so high in contention and stuff like that. They did finish in second place in the division, which people tend to forget. And what you definitely will tend to forget, despite the fact that they finished 14 games out, I mean, they were out for a good chunk of the season, is that they were actually in first place. They were in first place up through about mid-May. Right. And they could have probably could have continued to compete if they had kept a little bit of that momentum going with them. This was a really, really hard series that they played against Kansas City, this 4-game series where they went 1-3. And that included a walk-off loss and a 1-0 loss. And so, if you're going to sit down, if you're going to play through 1980 and try to replay these Oakland A's, I think what you'll discover is that, Martin's team and the way that he got these players to play was actually pretty remarkable given the level of talent that he had. Right. And the fact that they were able the next season to go to the postseason is also a pretty remarkable thing. That's the thing, right? I think that the hatred that has evolved over time against complete games and this idea that Martin's a great villain is really, really overblown. We don't have time here. I don't want this video to go on forever, but perhaps in the future we can look a little bit closer at the careers of those starters that he supposedly ruined and see what happened. I know, having looked at this before, that there were also drug problems, and there were probably also some defensive problems in the 1982 Athletics that caused a lot of those otherwise good performances to turn into losses. But we'll look at that in a later date. There you have it. Talk with you a little bit later. Bye.